removing all that low end. I see it all the time. You're shoving that low end down. Just be mindful of that because it's not good. I personally don't like doing that. I don't think it's good practice when you're shoving all that low end out. In that case, if you're really anal about all that low end, just use a filter. You'll cut out what you want a bit much more musically instead, rather than just EQing, just going, pressing that down, and then you sort of pushing it all out into the mid-range and high end, and that can create a lot of phase issues. Okay, I hope you like the new sort of setup. The lap building wasn't too bad. It got a bit hot on my lap here, but was actually pretty good. My lap's nice and warm now. I know there's a lot there to unpack, and we're just skimming the surface sometimes of some of these more complex topics. This is the art of mixing. It's not the engine. I don't know what else. I was gonna say the engineering of mixing. We are looking at the border strokes, good at a painting, looking at adding the blues, adding the yellows, creating the art that's available, and looking at topics, looking at the techniques, looking at the skills that go into creating that beautiful artwork. Okay, everything that I talk about, please write it down or look it up on Google and explore. So much to cover. This can turn in 5-hour breakdown. The key things to look at here are, if you have a song that you really want to play but it doesn't work harmonically, a key way to be able to incorporate that is creating space, creating that distance from those two songs. You can say, oh, you just wait for it to finish. If you're at midway of a song, it's boring just standing there waiting for the song to finish. Find ways to creatively confident in transitioning, in moving into another song. Yeah, and cutting out the low end, adding a lot of effects on that vocal, adding a lot of effects in general on the song to separate, to push it out. Keeping the low end of the current song that you're moving in, decreasing the fader of the song you want to remove, lowering the volume, filtering it out. These are just some examples of things you can do to remove that song as quick as possible so it doesn't interfere with the one you want to play. In most cases, I would say put it in a moment that works better. But if you have this, in this kind of example where it's not going to really work later, then this is something that you can do. Secondly, when you are looking at doing is faster transitions, okay, be mindful of that low end. If you have 2 bars, like a bar to do that quick switch, always be mindful to remove some of that low end. If you don't get a chance, just always try to remove that song even slightly earlier. Even if it might just be off-putting, perhaps try and add a quick little effect. The best thing to do in those situations is just do that in like a full-blown show that you have. Be mindful of doing them. Doing them when you have a lot of practice behind that mix, that show that you want to do. This is when these moments are really cool because you have them really down, you have them prepared, you have them practiced. When you are doing this, when you have them very sort of just let's go for it, and you're creating these very spontaneous sort of transitions and blends, etc., you just need to be mindful of that. And sometimes you will have a bit of that low end leak. It's not super noticeable, it's not going to be like, oh my god. But it's just something you want to be mindful of. Do your best to practice that, have that confidence to transition, even if there might be a little bit of low end leakage. And then the final thing is looking at using your EQ, creating depth with the dimensionality in your mix with the EQ. EQ is very, very powerful. Because you might only have 3 bands available in the current setup that you have, it's still very powerful. Still a lot of things you can do with that. Adding mid-range, increasing the volume, taking out some of the low end, moving high end. These are some things you can gently do, but just be mindful again of phase issues if you really crank it up. Removing all that low end, I see it all the time, you're shoving that low end down. Just be mindful of that because it's not good. I personally don't like doing that. I don't think it's good practice when you're shoving all that low end out. In that case, if you're really anal about all that low end, just use a filter. You'll cut out what you want a bit much more musically instead, rather than just EQing, just going, pressing that down, and then you sort of pushing it all out into the mid-range and high end, and they can create a lot of phase issues. These aren't linear phase EQs, but when you're using a filter, you can gently carve out that section. It's much more musical and a little more audio friendly. In this case, when you are removing the low end, remove a little bit. You don't need a lot to get the point across. These are very powerful EQs. 10 dB is a big difference. So that's just something to be mindful of, but great to create stronger blends, stronger connections with the songs, with transitions, especially if you want to do more classical mixing techniques, longer form transitions, vinyl. mixing approaches. Can approach it from something like that. I really like to do that kind of stuff. Manipulating the EQ, bringing up that vocal, make it more prominent in the song. Particularly if you're working with the full song, you're not working with just the vocal line. Being able to increase a certain mid-range of a song and decreasing another one. This is when you're able then to use full song, the full production, and then being able to musically use the counterpoint, use different other mixing techniques to make the songs work well together. So you have the melody of one and another one, and you give that call and answer approach. And you're able to then connect them well together and bring another third song to create a bit of a space around them, and you can do some really wild and creative things. So from a beginner standpoint, just look at moving that low end and increasing that mid-range. See how you can have two songs playing together and see, just tweaking that mid-range and what can you do with that. This is a big episode. It's probably the biggest one so far. And I have to say, I'm learning so much as well from this. In being introspective about the way I approach things is really helping me be a lot more clear and coherent with, the approaches that I take and the way that I think about things when I'm mixing. So thank you. Thanks so much for allowing me to educate myself as well. I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much for joining me again on another breakdown. And I'll catch you on the next one. All right. Bye-bye.